All right. So we are back. Thank you so much from Mark and Dave. Make sure that you keep your eyes out for the bi-weekly podcast. And there's so much that we've talked about already this morning, and we're ready to really, really take a deep dive. This next session, we've got a use case showdown where we talk about real stories. We're going to keep it all the way real, 100 right here. We're going to talk about pitfalls and success. Everything is obviously not a walk through the park. This is new. This is something that has been around for a long time, but people are really starting to sink their teeth in. This is like the Wild West. There isn't any standard SOP. There isn't any cookie cutter path that you go down when making this journey. And there are things that have happened, right? There are things that may have happened to me that may not have happened to you, depending on use case, right? And there isn't one solution fits all. There's no magic pill. So we're going to break it down. We're going to talk about it. I want to introduce to you all Brent Erb from Phillips and my man John Pillar from Pillar Consultants. And let's take a deep dive, gentlemen. Industry 4.0 is all about doing more with data, not just collecting it, but what do we do with it? Like the gentleman talked about in the last segment, what do we do with it? How do we prioritize it? How do we put IT and OT together? How do we make these things talk about what's going on in our factory from the floor all the way up? How do we have them communicate with each other? And with so many players in the industry, with so many different solutions and options, and even talking heads saying, use this solution or use that solution, how do we wade through the crap? How do we wade through the stuff and find out what our particular pathway is? Welcome, John and Brent. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Drew.
So let's get right into it. Can you all share a specific real-life use case where Industry 4.0 technologies have addressed proactively any of the manufacturing needs or anticipated things that are coming up?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I guess it popped up on me, so there it is. Specific, probably where I would fit into is, I'm right now focusing on a bunch of churn, batch matching kind of a facility, and at this one, it's somewhat greenfield. It's been automated. There has been some anticipation of future layout. And it would be successful if you look at it on the micro level, but on the macro level, as far as scaling out, there was some choices that were made perhaps 6-7 years ago that are probably not the best choice for today. So we're in that process, and it's all about the way I like to look at any of these, Drew, is you have to look at knowing the process, then automate it, and then we can do all that, the rest of the magic that we're looking for. Where I'm at, many places are automated. They're not necessarily fully data collection. And so I'm down in that dirty level of pulling the data and then doing all the cool things the guys were talking about previous to us here. So
let's pause there real quick, because I think that that's one of the things that as an industry we're running into, right? They say, oh, we've automated these processes years ago and we're not getting the ROI out of it. We don't believe in it. Or you get the people that are dipping their toe in the water because it's on the horizon, right? Or it's actually here and we're in it. And it's not a mythical creature anymore. So now it's like sink or swim. Now people have their back against the wall, and, processes that maybe they got into it earlier and they're not as efficient as they could be because they're using older, outdated systems, and they think that they're automated. There's a level to automation, correct? Where is the bar, or where's the standard that you should say manufacturers, in order to compete with what is coming? Tyler just talked about, hey, we're setting up for now, but we're also setting up for the future. And I think that that's, is going to give us a competitive advantage. What do you say to those companies that say, hey, we're already automating? How do we discern the level or the standard of this is what automation is, and this is what you need to move into, and this is where you currently are?
Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, so our automation efforts I mean, to that answer to that question, I would say most of our projects were overlapping of supervisors with spreadsheets of data. So they're saying, well, we've automated the process. Well, how have you automated it? Well, we have a lead person in our work cell that goes down through and takes some numbers off of each of the machines that we operate in that cell. They put it in a worksheet, and we get calculations from that. Oh, is that automated? Really? No, it's not. In that particular aspect, we had a project. It's a dicing saw, and in very quick terms, this is a machine that makes microscopic cuts in a piece of ceramic. There's 34 of those in this work cell. Our supervisor says, well, we've already automated this process. Back to the spreadsheet idea. No, you really didn't automate the process. You've collected the data and then automated the calculations. The math is automated. That's about it. How do you, maybe not real time either. I mean, that's a question you have to ask with these projects. Do you need it real time? Do you need it part time or near real time? And our particular project with respect to that example was to collect the log files from each of those 34 machines. So we did that. We extracted all the data. Those machines kept track of every single cut that they made and every piece of information. Was it down because of maintenance? Was it down for some fault in the cooling system, et cetera, et cetera? We could automatically collect all that data from that equipment, store it in a database, and then report on it automatically. So we could get OEE in near real time. So if you're in Industry 4.0 projects and you say, well, I've automated that process, ask yourself, what part of it did you automate? Did you automate the whole data pipeline, if I can call it that? Did you automate it from the data collection side all the way up to the reporting side? Because if you haven't, you really haven't automated your process. There must be some manual aspect in there that you've not automated.
100%. And that was a great way to paint that picture for us, because I think that is some of the pitfalls that we are struggling with and some of the barriers that are keeping us from having a smoother transition. I want to shout out Brian in the chat. Everybody that is here, continue to hit up that chat, continue to talk to us, continue to stay active. Brian said, we're talking about business automation. A lot of people, or you might have individually automated machines, but the entire process isn't automated. And I think that's where our return is. Yes, you've been automating specific processes, but now how do we make that make sense in a way that affects your bottom dollar? And then also a big part with me is engaging workers. How do we continue to do two things simultaneously, get your money up, and also engage workers so that they don't think that this automation is a threat to their job, and then they're enabled to look at this data and say, what of this data will make me a better worker? How can I interpret these certain processes to make me a better worker, and then communicate with the next process that this thing goes through? We're talking about, all of those things. Let's talk about some of the pitfalls that you guys have seen that may have affected an industry or affected a business, or a pitfall that shed new light on a process that maybe we should be automating a little bit better. John, if you want to hop in.
Sure. So I would ask, one of the pitfalls we've had that I've seen is collecting the data is great, but you have to know the truth source of that data. Brent made the comment that you have machine down reasons and tags for why the machine was stopped so you can do your OEE. I've got a process right now where there's a bunch of barcodes that the operator shoots to tell us the status of the machine. And I guarantee that they just shoot the top one every time, right? So the data, again, part of the question is, what is the truth of your data and how are you collecting it? That method isn't really different than what Brett was saying of I wrote down the numbers, right? So if you're at that point of writing down the numbers, or your trust, I don't like the term trust. I do trust people. But the operator is doing the best job that they can, right? And so you have to know that whole data pipeline and why I know that this line is down. So then do you ask yourself, do I put a little RFID tag on there, and when the maintenance guy walks up, boom, he's doing maintenance on the machine, right? So then you're logging it that way. So you got to start thinking multidimensionally, right? And those are some of the pitfalls of being able to know that number is right, that what you're doing there.
Now, is it easy for an owner, and this might be a question for a whole nother segment itself, for a business owner or a C-suite individual or somebody that's in charge of automating these processes and productivity, is it easy for them to identify where some of those blind spots may be? And if it's not, what would you suggest to help them?
I can answer that because I have John started a great conversation here. One of the aspects or pitfalls, as you mentioned, Drew, is getting feedback from the users. So I'll give two examples of one project that we tried and failed, and another project where we actually listened to the users, and it's currently quite viable, and we're expanding on it. So the one project we worked on was to collect and statistically graph more or less SPC type of charts for our top cost of non-quality products going through our assembly line. So the top 8 products were identified. We collected test results at a test, one of our 7 or 8 different tests. We collected the results from that key test, and we displayed SPC charts in that production area. Nobody looked at them.
Wow.
It was a big, giant 55-inch TV right in that work cell, but nobody looked at them. Why? Well, your audience or our audience was the operator of that test system, but we didn't interview them. We didn't ask them, do you want this? We just said, hey, this is going to be really cool. I'm identifying this obviously as a pitfall. Identify your users. Who are your users of the data, and who is going to make sense of that data? They might be separate individuals or maybe all in one. But that was a flop project because the operators don't have the time, given our volume of throughput, they don't have the time to take even 5 seconds to look at that TV and say, did this latest test, because it failed, did this latest test affect my SPC, my volumes, or my quality? And do we continue to run more products, or do we stop now? They just don't have the time to do it. So interview your users. Conversely to that, we had a temperature and humidity project that the users actually came to us and said, we have issues with humidity in our building. Long story short, we have a gluing process that has to glue for 8 hours, and it has to have certain environmental conditions. And again, to be brief, the users, in this case supervisors in production, came to us and said, we don't know what's going on. We have a process where we glue these 2 pieces together. They cure for 8 hours. They go to a process that's 5 or 6 steps down in the production cycle, and they fail like 80% of the time. And they figured out that it was this humidity level. The glue couldn't cure properly. So the general idea here is the users came to us and said, we need better analysis. It wasn't necessarily process control, but it was process monitoring. And so we implemented industrial strength temperature and humidity sensors. We're plotting that information every 5 seconds. We've got 8 sensors throughout our factory in certain key areas that monitor temperature and humidity. So there's a case where the users come to us and say, we need this. What can you do to help? Versus saying, here you are, user. We're giving you an automation process. Use it. And they say, oh, really?
Well, how? Right.
Yeah.
So that's important. That's very important. So for me, as a workplace guy, as a culture guy, that is one of the things that is the main reason why I think we struggle with retention right now. Back to what John was talking about earlier. If I am a operator and in my mind I'm the lowest position on this totem pole, do I really want to say my machine was down because of human error, or do I want to put something else in there that kind of takes the shade off of myself so that I can keep my job? When we make the culture of transparency, like Brent just said, and this is what is so exciting for me personally about IoT and Industry 4.0 and connected factories, is now I can provide real data, real time, and keep my job. And I can say, hey, the more transparent that I am, the better they have the real picture of what's going down here and can provide me with better solutions so that my glue isn't separating, right? My machine downtime is this or that, or I can tell them the real reason why we have these things. I want to jump over to the chat real quick because the chat is popping off. Please keep them coming. Brent, this one is for you specifically. Have you been able to move toward closed loops on correcting anomalies that you identify in real time so flaws and waste go down?
Yeah, great question, because that temperature and humidity project is a good example of that and an answer to that. We just got started with that project last year. We are moving towards, so we have secondary humidifiers, right? We already have primary humidifiers in our factory. When the humidity level drops below, I think it's 25% is what was identified, we send an alert to the supervisors. Well, that really doesn't do much good. So the next step is to actually figure out how we can tie into the secondary humidifiers, which our maintenance team turns on. So the manual process now, which will be automated later, a supervisor gets that alert, hey, your humidity level dropped below 25%, stop your production, contact the maintenance team, have them turn on the humidifier, the secondary humidifiers, and get that humidity level above that 25% spec, if I can call it that. So yeah, as far as quality goes, and to your point, Drew, the operators 4 or 5 steps down that were doing the test and failing those 90% of parts, they were concerned. It's like, well, wait a minute, it's not our fault this test is failing. They didn't know why, though, until somebody actually dug into it and figured out, oh yeah, it's the humidity levels. So that is a good example of where we collect the data, and the data tells you the truth of what's going on. And so, to answer the chat question, we are moving towards further automating that process.
Yeah. So real-time examples of how these things are going together, what data to collect, how to do more with the data that you have, and how to enable your down-the-line workers to give you a real story of what's going on. Again, we've got to give, we've got this workforce problem, right? And there are people that go in and out of the door, and sometimes we don't really know the reasons. And if I'm showing up and I've got 80% failure rate, I'm thinking I'm not doing this job right, and I'm just waiting for somebody to give me that old tap on the shoulder, and I know what that is, right? And when you have that type of thing looming over your head, how can you concentrate on productivity? How can you, really dig in and say, hey, this is what's going on, this is what's not going on? So great real-time use. Can you guys think of any other things that was an instant tweak or an instant thing like that increased productivity and gave you all an insight, or gave a client or a customer of yours an insight into a process that they weren't understanding at one point?
So I was not part of this design, but I went to a factory tour, okay? And they were collecting all the data. It's an electronics manufacturer, pick and place, setting small parts onto circuit boards. I believe they had somewhere like 7 or 9 boards on the sheet, and that they were pick and placing all the same pieces. When it would run through, there was actually an operator at the end of the line that would get an inspection note of problems with solder joints. So they had 100% throughput because the operator at the end would manually fix the problems. When they provided that level of data to an intern, and this was an intern that came up with this, so I think part of what you're kind of looking for here too is really cool. The intern sat there and said, I wonder if I can look at the data that's on the pick and place machine. And what that intern did was, of the 7 heads that were vacuum heads that were picking them, he started to manage where the failures were happening on the end of the line. Because you would get a failure rate, right? So he created just an XY chart with little dots of 7 colors that as failure started to go up, that blue dot starts to float up. And what happened then, the maintenance guy would come and replace that one head. And suddenly your failure would go back down. Where previously, over just a PM changeover, they would change all 7 heads because they didn't know which one was bad, but they knew they have a bad throughput. So they ended up doing that, and just the shift of the operator shifting boards over, a maintenance guy would come and change that one head. They got from 70% throughput to 90% throughput, right? Just because an intern was playing with the data, right? So that's the other piece too, is providing it to those that have that opportunity to ask the questions. So that was kind of cool experience.
I love that, enabling workers. And if you think about that, not only now can they see when to switch that head out, but now they can anticipate it. Hey, this head is failing at every 1502. So 1495, we need to start the process of slowing whatever downline or increasing as it goes, so that we can anticipate this changeover that's coming. And then instead of changing all 7 heads out, now we can be more efficient in our ordering and stuff like that. So this is the one that fails every 1500. The other ones we can do, preventative maintenance on and keep them running for longer. And again, the productivity comes that being enabled by the data, being able to collect the data is what's giving us insight into these. Brent, is there anything? I kind of hopped in. I don't want to hold you back. Is there anything you wanted to add?
We don't have any real-time projects as far as feedback goes, other than the our ongoing project with the temperature and humidity application and trying to tie into those secondary humidifiers. But my prior example, when we first got started with those saws, we are looking to, well, we already have actually, but not real-time, are using the data to calculate OEE. One of the first things we did was take the log file data, because we can see downtime for each one of those 34 pieces of equipment. We can see what product they ran. Each product has a different recipe. So we used that data to calculate our OEE and presented that to the supervisor, who actually formed a project and went back and analyzed how efficient we're using each of those pieces of equipment, each serialized unit, each piece of equipment. For the longest time, we just kind of assumed that, oh, by the way, shutting down one of those saws because they only do a specific type of product. So when they switch over to another product, they have to do what's called dressing the blade. They have to clean the blade off. So for the longest time, we thought, oh, wait a minute, if we just do one product for one saw, that makes it more efficient, right? Because now we don't have to go through the dressing process, the maintenance of the blade process, in order to put another product on there. That takes upwards of a half an hour per product to redress that saw and get it reconfigured for a new product. The data we collected from those log files and were able to manipulate and present in a usable manner, I'll say, caused that supervisor to look again and say, well, we've been doing it this way. It's the old mindset of we've always done it this way. What's the problem, right? Wrong. When you actually collect the data and look at it in a meaningful way and display it in meaningful graphs and charts or gauges or whatever you're using for your visuals, it's telling. And in this case, it was telling, to the point of, and generally speaking, hey, supervisor, the thought process of keeping that machine idle just because you don't want to spend that half an hour to redress and reconfigure for another product was wrong. You're gaining efficiency if you actually do that process.
So that's the challenge. I think that is one of the big things that, a lot of people say, well, where do I start, right? Or they say, hey, maybe I've started in the wrong place and I need to look downline of some of my age-old processes. I've been there. I've been the foreman that has been the second shift guy, and I'm like, if we just do this or this differently, or at least try it, then maybe we can change something to production. But again, it comes back to that job security. It comes back to the culture of the company. Should I be saying this? But if I'm equipped, again, with data and I can show charts and I can show these things, it gives me the leverage to walk into that office and say, hey, as C-suite individuals, as admin, as the people that are, CEOs and whatever it may be, this isn't your level of transparency. This isn't what you see day to day, but here's a report. Here's what we've been finding, and we can do this differently this way. That's very important. And I challenge people, like I said, to look at some of those processes, some of those we've done it this way for so long, because you don't know what we can do until we know what we can do. And we don't know where that bar is until we push up against it and actually look at and analyze what we're doing. And up until, recent 15, 20 years, we haven't been able to really quantify some of these things in the way that we are now. So what are some of those key factors to tailoring techniques to certain industries? We talked about food and bev right now. We talked about what you guys have been able to work on and work in. Give me some examples.
I think democratizing the data and making it available to others, right? First, you have to collect it right. Um, Brent had it already in log files. I have lots of machines that are just doing. So you have to start collecting and networking and making sure you have that data. So that's the first thing to me. And then let people look at it and see it. Like you were saying, Drew, if I have data, I know I have transparency. So I'm not worried about that tap on the shoulder, right? So it gives you power to have that conversation if you can share it with individuals. So I think that's a big deal. Democratizing the data and collecting it. You can't do anything if you don't collect it, right? Sometimes, to Brent's point, you don't know the data that you're not collecting. That humidity, right? I've said for a long time, I think the building automation system also needs to be fed into my data chain, because that's an entire system that I'm not looking at while I'm manufacturing. So that's a big deal too.
I'm going to add to that, John, because I think it's a great topic, the democratization of data. Well, we have data stored locally in an SQL server at the moment. It's a lot of test data, test result data. So one objective that I'm trying to push, and I'm actually making progress because we have a team, Philips being a global company, we have a team in the Netherlands that needed access to that data. So we're taking the data, first of all, from a local stored database into Azure. I'll just, in general terms, put it that way, which makes it even more available, right? So those global teams that are helping you to analyze the data can get to it a lot easier in Azure versus a local SQL server. Yes, for some of you that have the question, we can give them access to that local database. Azure is much easier because we have all of our other process data in Azure. So think about that. Where do you put the data? Making it available, but where do you also put it? More to John's point, we have a project, or I've started a project now where, in general terms, think of it this way. We collect test data at process number 1. So we get a piece of raw ceramic that comes into our facility. We test it for thickness. That's it. We just test it for thickness. We have that data stored in Azure. We have end result tested data, end data, from one of the 7 or 8 different tests that we conduct on a final product. We have that data. Wouldn't it be great if we could correlate that data? Does it correlate, and how does it correlate, such that, back to the person in the chat, question about quality, there's an idea of where we can save parts and save resources and save time and save money. If we figure out that, hey, if that thickness is at the upper end of the spec limit, there's a 90% chance that that part's going to fail at the end. But democratizing that data is, in my mind, and to your point, John, the only way to get those thoughts out. What can we do with this data? And this is one example.
I love it. And I think that the more we have these type of conversations with people that are doing it real time, that's going to be something that continues to push the needle and makes democratization of this data the norm. Speaking of democratizing the data, we are back popping in the chat. Like I said, we got a question about convincing management. Usually the people that are higher up have the access to all of the data, but as we've talked about and highlighted, us three here, it's usually the people at the bottom of that pyramid that need it and can use it the most. So how do we begin to convince the management of the value of the investment to not only do more with data, but give us more access to that data that they've done so much with, so we can go from top down that hasn't seemed to be that effective to bottom up?
Hit them where it counts. What KPIs? Yeah, let me expand on that, right? What KPIs do they care about? Ask them. Again, back to the user. If you're trying to convince management to look at this data, what do they care about? Quick example, and I'll let you chime in, of course, John. A quick example is first pass yield is a KPI that our plant manager really wants to look at. That metric essentially tells us what's the percentage of first time right products. and where did those products fail the first time, and can we improve on that particular process? He cares about that. How do we get him that information? Our manufacturing execution system can tell us, because there's a non-conformance process we go through. But the bottom line is, ask your management team, what do they care about?
I think the KPI point is huge because I've got a group right now where operators have a goal set, supervisors have a goal set, engineers have a goal set, maintenance has a goal set, and management has a goal set, and they're not even in the same Venn diagram, kind of, even, right? And that's part of the problem too, of you have to know who you're talking to, who's your user, and what is their goal, what is their requirement for success, right? And how do they term that out? So I think that's the big piece. So if management is who you're focusing on, what do they need to know, and how can I present them the data so that they can be successful for their goal set? It's all about just knowing your user. I think we started with that, and I think that's a huge piece across all the do more with data, is democratize it and show it in the way that your user cares about. Those are the two
Put it
pieces.
in the right channel. So there we go. So this is almost like learning another language, right? It's like, we have our regular language, we have our language at our controls, programming these machines or whatever we may be working on, and then there's this new language of data. How do I interpret it? How do I then go back and speak it in the language that my higher ups need to know or my counterparts need to know? And that gets us into this next question from the chat. When you have operators looking at their own HMIs and controls already, are you doing anything special to motivate them to look at new extra sources or even more valuable data to help them get better results? Or that's where the question stops. A little bit to me, it sounds like as well, how are we enabling these same downstream workers to say, this is what we should be looking at, not what you have me looking at. This is what really affects this process at my point, if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. I'll answer the question this way. No offense to anyone in various generations, but we have quite a spread of generations in our factory. We have the younger generation who grew up with technologies, grew up with computers, for example, and we have the other generation who are ready to retire, who they know how to use computers, don't misunderstand me, but they don't know how to use computers, if I can put it that way. I hope everybody understands when I say it like that. So when you go to someone on the factory floor that's been in our production site for 30 years, and you say, we're going to collect this data and we're going to present it to you, they give you the deer in the headlights look. Like, what? Conversely to that, you have the newer generation who grew up with the internet, grew up with computers. They say, ooh, this is exciting. How can I help? That's my point. Ultimately, get those users involved. Those are the ones that are going to get excited. And don't get me wrong, that other generation might do the same thing. I'm part of that generation. I'm excited to deal with data as part of my job responsibilities. But in general, get those users involved. You'll be able to tell when you go to the factory floor, visit the factory floor. Again, back to the users. Visit those users. Tell them what you're doing. Get them excited about it. Collect their feedback. Listen to them. Don't just say, yeah, I got it. Listen to them. Set up a meeting. I've done this with several people in one of the what we call our alpha area. It's the start of our build process. I've actually sat down with those two individuals, and said, what do you guys care about? What information do you have and what information do you need that you care about? Back to involving the users. They'll get excited. They will. I've seen it in their eyes. I've seen it in their reactions. They get excited when you start talking their language.
Yeah. If you have the capability of changing the dashboard that the operator is using, it's a big deal. And the generations is I'm straddling that generation there, Brett, of I know what a rotary phone is, but I'm also a smartphone user, right?
Yeah,
So so a long time ago, my first automation job was actually automating buildings and correctional facilities. So, and this was in the early 2000s, right? So we had touchscreens, and the way the method of the screen worked is you would touch the screen and let go, and that would be the mouse click, and that made perfect sense to those individuals of that day. It's been 15 years since I've been in that world, but I'm still talking to my friends for there. They had to change the way that works because smartphones changed the way humans use the dashboard, right? So now when you touch it, now that the touch is the thing that makes it happen, which is a problem if you're unlocking a door and you're not intending to unlock a door, right? So, a liftoff was a reason to make sure you were right. So you had to change the user's interface and that whole method. So generationally speaking, there's a great deal of change that may need to happen too, of how it's presented. It's the same data, but those older guys had the gut of they could touch and know the feel of the machine and the hum of the machine. Now I'm actually giving you the speed, right? And all of those pieces. And it's just a different way of absorbing and knowing how the system's working and the way the kitty purrs, right? So that's it.
There you go. And so have you all seen or heard of or been around any success stories in kind of building that bridge between the knowledge and the legendary things that people will learn when the early stages of automation or even before that are still here? Because you're right, we've got 5 generations at one time, all the way down to screenagers, right? So the screenagers, how do we make a smooth transition from generational knowledge to digitizing that and speaking a language? How do we interpret that language? Have you seen anything that has been successful?
Go for it, Brett.
Well, I can't say we've had projects along those lines specifically to that regard. Generally speaking, I would answer the question by saying, get those people involved. Some of that older generation, they can put their hand on the machine and feel the hum. They just won't come along. It's just, you can't change a person's, they say as you get older, you get more stubborn, or somewhere along those lines. Some people, you just can't change their thought or their mentality about any topic, really. I can put my hand on the machine and I can feel the hum of the machine. Your data doesn't tell me anything, and that's where it ends. Getting them involved, at least trying to get them involved, is a good start at the beginning of the project, right? So that dicing OEE, we went to, as we say, go to the GEM and talk to both sides of the generations, because we have them in that work cell, the ones that are ready to retire, the ones that are just coming on and learning. And we asked them, what do you see as process yield issues? What do you see as time-consuming issues? And we got their feedback. The ones that want to come along for the ride will. The ones that won't come along for the ride, they just won't. And actually, at that point, I don't have an answer for them.
Yeah. I know networking and data collection is the big piece right now. Those are the two definites that I have, Drew. I'm in South Bend, and Studebaker used to be here back in the 1960s, And when I asked people around this neighborhood his name was Clem, who was Clem Studebaker's primary blacksmith competition, because he had somebody here in South Bend, because he was a blacksmith. Nobody knows that guy's name. You know what he didn't do? He didn't put a motor on a wagon, right? He put a motor on a wagon, and he got his company to make it to the 1960s. So he made a choice. He didn't know what was happening. They weren't even flying airplanes back then, right? The Wright brothers hadn't even done it yet. So I guess my answer to you, Drew, is I don't know. But I do know if you don't network your machines and you don't start collecting your data, you're not going to make it to the 2060s, right? What are you going to do to get past the 2060s, man? That's where we're at.
We're still writing that script right now. Absolutely. And I think the way that we figure that out is by continuing to write it. I will say some of the things that I've seen is maybe putting those people together. The guy that knows the hum of the machine, and then the kid that knows how to take, hey, what does that hum mean to you? Oh, that means a failure is going to happen, or a speed or a feed might need to change, or there's a particular outlet that we need to look at, and then they can put that hum of the machine into digital terms for us to continue to look at. But that's right. There is no answer right now, right? There is no answer, but I think that you guys hit on a recurring theme, and that's perfect for us to get ready into the wrap up. Things that I've found right now from our conversation is number one, definitely identify who your client and who your user is. The better we can do that in all of these processes, we'll be better able to identify which ones to start with. We'll be able to prioritize data. We'll be able to prioritize which data is most important to who and how to democratize that thing. The second one is open communication. That's from top to bottom, right? From the bottom side, with all of these new screenagers coming in, they need to know if what I'm doing, am I being productive? I need this feedback right now. I'd like to see where my skills in this digital screenager world applies to this job right here, right now. And if I tell you transparently, these are some issues that I have going on, I still have job security, and you'll take that information and enable me to do my job better. From the other side, the older generations, they need this security to know that this new automation and this new wave of technology, even if they can't get down with it right away, they're not being pushed out of the door. Because one thing that I like to harp on, people see me, I got the New American Manufacturing Renaissance. I'm talking to the youth. I'm talking to the screenagers. But this is not a replacement thing. This is us with a lot of open jobs, and we need both ends to fill this thing up with all of the knowledge that they have to continue to push us forward and help us dictate what 2060 and beyond is going to look like for sure. And it takes both of these people. So once we have that communication, we want them to tell you what's important to collect. They've got to be able to communicate back with you and say, this is the data that we need, or this is the data that we're not collecting that we think would be helpful. Like how many times that saw blade needs to be changed out in the process of doing those types of things. Like the waffles here. Hey, I don't want to pick and pull bad waffles all day and be doing this by eye. If we can scan them, if we can look for inconsistencies throughout the machine, that'll stop bottlenecks and that'll help us with transitioning down the line. Collecting that data, we got to do it. Let's collect as much as we can and then democratize the data and enable the people. Gentlemen, what will you guys add if I miss anything?
You said it, mentorship, right? That all of that along with that mentorship, and that's how you bring those two generations together, and mentorship and apprenticeship along the way. That's huge.
Yeah, if you the whole topic is multifaceted, and I think you hit each of the key points nicely, Drew. The only thing I would add is to say when you're looking at your projects, we have what we call a funnel, a digital factory funnel of about 34 different projects. You've got to include all the facets that you mentioned, that Drew mentioned. If you don't include them all, you're probably going to make a mistake when you go to prioritize those projects.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good, Dave.
Great.
Nice to see you,
Great
Brock.
session. Yeah, great session we just
It was
had
very
there.
good. Yes, thank you, Brent. That was very
Yeah.
insightful.
Yeah.
So we'll hop
Thanks,
on and do
Brent,
a
John.
quick recap, Mark and Dave.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So one of the things that I thought was actually interesting was they brought up a lot of topics that I see every day. It's democratizing the data, getting the data to the right people, the right role, and how they want to look at the data. So that's, those I run into that all the time with people. So and getting buy-in. And I think Brent was right. It's like you got to talk to the right people to, get to the bottom line, to find KPIs that they're interested to really generate interest in it from a management level.
Yeah, I think what resonated too with me was the end users and getting data into their hands that they actually could use to improve their day-to-day life without making them feel being pushed out or being blamed for poor machine performance, right? I think the intimidation factor that you see a lot of time on the shop floor when new technology comes in, the first thing that goes through an operator's mind is, I'm out the door. So why would I support this? It's like turkeys voting for Christmas. They're not going to vote for Christmas, right? But if you can show them that their job is safe, that their job is evolving, and their job now can get less stressful, and they can be part of the continuous improvement process and be more than just a cog in the machine with the data, and make them part of what should they see and what do they need to do their job better. It becomes more of an engaging factor, like Brent and John were saying, was now they're involved, right? They're participating in something instead of receiving something that they don't really care about. And I think when you can make that transition with data and the cultural aspect and the change, you've really got something.
100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Knowing that I'm an actual part of the bigger process through being empowered by this data is the culture that is gonna be the key to enabling these things and enabling workers and getting that productivity out of them. Again, I can say, I've been everything in the shop, from the hired help that came in and swept to, foreman, and that is one of the most intimidating things, especially stepping into a shop for the first time. And we talk about the screenagers and the younger generation of workers that are coming in. You might know that you have these skills. You might have been testing them and maybe in a safer environment, maybe at home, maybe in college or trade school or wherever that may have been. But even though you can do these things, if you walk into a new plant and these things aren't happening, then you begin to question yourself and you begin to worry about your job security. And if we think about job security, especially with the screenagers now, they came in, to the world. They know a pandemic. They know a stock market crash. They know all about insecurities. So they already have that anxiety going on. Is this job going to be here? Is this going to be a career? And then more importantly, am I going to be here? And if you see yourself as a part of the whole picture and you're making this go around, then it enables you to see how you're important and how that data that you're collecting does matter. So, Dave, we talked about how important it was to bring people in and to do those things. What else did you pull out of the conversation that you saw that you really liked?
I think part of it was the process, and Brent talked to this about his process, where they started putting environmental sensors around the plants to start measuring humidity and seeing that correlation between that and defective parts, where it was starting small and moving quickly, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, is like, okay, let's just start collecting the data, right? Do that quickly, start seeing the data, start looking at it. Is there a correlation? Yes. Okay, now we can actually expand on it. Now we can give the operators better feedback so that they're doing a better job, and they realize they're doing a better job, which is good for them. So they feel like they're part of the process and getting help with that. And then Brent was talking about the next step was, now I can actually close the loop on their humidifiers to actually control that process. So you're starting to see the data is actually driving the supervisory control of the plant to produce better product. So I just feel like there's a step process that you should do, because you're not going to do it all at once, right? You have to look at the data, you have to gather it, you have to make sense of it, you have to vet it, and then Brent hasn't gotten to this step yet. Once they close the loop, now they're going to need to scale it. Now I want to replicate this in all my plants. So how are you going to do that? So there's those steps you do that, but I think it's very small, bite-sized pieces will get you to a result and get you there quicker by doing it that way.
Yeah, Dave, I'd agree too. And that quick win, right? Find something that gets you a quick win, because that empowers people to see, yeah, this actually works. And the intern story about, where they were monitoring the vacuum heads, super excellent story because it's a quick win. Well, maybe it took them a bit, but it was something that an intern could do with data to make themselves be part of that process. So that whole engagement thing again, right? And it sounds like it really paid off. So great story, great concepts.
Yeah, and I feel like operators.
Another elephant in the room that's a good one is, with all of these different stories that we're talking about, think about the evolution of the quote unquote operator, right? So we go from a position that is mostly looked at as low skill, low intellect, or whatever it may be. And now we're saying, no, not anymore. Now we're saying you can be a person that is operating these machines while collecting data on your touchscreen, touchpad, and it enables us to have higher tech workers and higher skilled workers. Do you think that this is something that is bringing us not only into Industry 4.0 in terms of the things that we work on and the processes, but also the way that we work and the titles of how we work, if that makes sense?
I think the way that people will work will be different once that data becomes available, or once they start to realize they have some control and say over their particular operation. So it makes you think about what's going on rather than just being a mindless operation of torquing and bolts, right? Now, if there's problems or if there's issues and you feel, again, if you feel part of that process, you can start to say, what if I had this data? What if I had that? Or I see this happening, how can we solve it? And they become part of a problem solving team versus just being, again, that cog in the wheel that just says, I'm here to torque bolts.
Well, yeah, along those lines, I mean, this ties in with that HMI question and Brent talking about, promoting data on SPC that was ignored, and talking to the end user, talking to the operator. What do you actually need? We actually worked on a project where IT came to us and we were looking to get data, push it in the cloud and start developing machine learning models and do all this other information. And then while we were doing that process, somebody asked, like, hey, can you get this data out of our ERP and post it on the SCADA screen that the operator already has for a work order information? So yeah, that's easy. So we did that as kind of a side project. It only took a couple minutes really to do it. But the result of that was all the operators started really utilizing that and telling the plant managers, like, we need this. Don't take this away. This is really important to us. It's helpful. So kind of a backdoor approach to that, but that ended up driving the project further. So the management was listening to the operator saying, yeah, okay, let's keep going down this path, even though we started with a completely different use case. So just to point out that the operators can drive some of this as well, as long as they're listened to.
That's
so
the
back
key.
to mentorship. There you go.
Yeah,
back
exactly.
to mentorship. In the chat, we talked about mentorship. Mr. Pillar really hit it on the head about mentorship and helping to bridge that gap. And I think, Dave, what you just referenced was a great example of how we can get both sides involved. Is there anything else that you guys have been seeing as far as bringing that old school in with this new school? Because again, if I came up in the manufacturing industry and I'm part of one of the older generations, automation to me means something completely different than a kid who's got a Raspberry Pi connected room in middle school since they were a kid, and it turns on their lights when they come home from school and turns on ambient study music. And that's their level of automation that they're just doing every day at home with their small things. Have you guys seen anything that helps bridge that gap between those two generations, or any mentorship that you guys would like to highlight for our listeners right now?
I think the one that comes to mind for me is maintenance that I've seen with a few of our users, where maintenance guys, as they age and they're starting to roll off and retire now, they need to backfill those roles. A lot of the maintenance people are they've been around forever. They walk by a machine and they can tell, oh, that belt needs to be changed, or that motor is a bit loose because it's vibrating. I can hear it, right? So they're very attuned to the sounds. We've had some customers who, to kind of combat that tribal knowledge, install sensors on the different machines. And what they've been doing is the data that is being collected obviously correlates with sounds and the vision that the older generation brings to their troubleshooting. So by putting the data with the experience of the older maintenance workers, they can start to make lists of the 5 most common problems when you see this data. Now that is transferring the tribal knowledge more into a generalized knowledge, so people who come in as maintenance people can build off the existing knowledge by using data, because they've correlated what somebody knows to the data that's actually reflecting their troubleshooting mechanism. So that's allowed them to allow the attrition to happen and replace the older workforce with people who may not be as experienced or trained, but the data is kind of helping them move along faster and doing more with less.
Fantastic. Well, I'll leave it there. That's a great wrap up for this last session. If there's some key takeaway, I'd say develop your bench. Use this data to start developing those people that will step in for your 30-year, 25-year employee that's got all of that knowledge, because as much as we want them to, they won't be here forever. So start using this data to develop your bench. With that, gentlemen, we've got to buy or to build coming up next. Would you guys like to go ahead and knock that one out? Toss it up, fellas.
All right. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks, Drew.
So we got a few minutes before the next session starts.
Yes.
Mark, so
this is going to be
anything else you want to add? Yeah. Anything else you want to add to the conversation?
No, I think it's the same theme, right? There's a lot of opportunity out there to engage the workforce better. I did like the one comment about data's always been for management. And if I think back through all my years, that's absolutely right. It's always been topside, right? So I want to see, OEE for the plant, for a line, for a cell, but the operator just gets told, well, your OEE sucks.
Right.
So,
and then they're like, what's OEE?
What's OEE? What do you mean? Red is bad. Got it. Okay. Sorry. Okay. But I like the bottom up, right? Where, okay, what data would help, or what are you seeing? And then it's more of a collaboration on the shop floor, which the data can drive, because the data, tells the truth. If the data says this, you can't really argue it. And so then management can see the same thing, the operator can see the same thing, maintenance can see the same thing, process engineers can all see the same thing. So there's no opinions about what this could be. It's the data is showing us there's a quality issue at this station, at this step. We should address it. So it kind of levels the playing field, and it allows people to make better decisions, because everybody's using the same paradigm, not their own little siloed system that may not have the bigger picture. I think that's a really important thing of what we're seeing nowadays.
Yeah, I just think that, and I think part of that is the tools that are out there today are making that, the access to that data a lot better, that you can start adding context to the data. You can start, even though we talked about earlier, we've been collecting data forever, but now people have better tools to start using that data, adding context, querying the data, different visualization tools. That's becoming more accessible to people. You don't have to be a SQL expert and know how to make some giant query to get to the data. There are tools out there that are helping that. So I think that's where you start moving faster. And I think that's really the big change from data collection. It's no longer the tag name value timestamp that we're used to on the OT side. It is now tag name value timestamp, where it was located, what shift it was, what SKU was running. All that data is now really accessible.
Yeah, there'll be a good session tomorrow, just as a teaser. This is where the rise of your shadow IT comes from, right? It's easier to get at that data, so you get all these nice little systems that pop up that can help a lot, but they become security risks unmanageable and such too. So there's good and bad with that one. So that'll be a great topic for tomorrow's session.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the session that's about to start that you're moderating, Mark, on the build versus buy. I mean, I run into customers often that have tried building their own systems, and some are successful, some are not. But it's always interesting. And should I be building this from scratch to meet my exact needs, or is there something I can get off the shelf? So looking forward to this next discussion.
Yeah, me too. To me, the most interesting thing here is we live in the manufacturing world, and what's the most natural thing for manufacturing people to do is build stuff, right? So that's not a far stretch to think, well, why wouldn't I just build this myself? Because it's software, it's readily available. I can watch YouTube videos, I can do some research, and I can figure this out because that's what I do. I'm an engineer. I make things, I experiment, and I improve them. So it's a logical journey. So it's and I've been down that road myself. So
you've built a few.
Maybe a few. How good they were is how good they were is up for debate. But
So VB6 program from 1998.
It ran.
Might still be running for all you know.
It's still running somewhere. Yes, exactly. All right.